I am a human being and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Reeva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Profiler Africa, right here on the YouTube. I'm Paul Llewellyn, and tonight we're diving into one of South Africa's most infamous criminal cases, the OJ case of South Africa, the Menendez brothers, it's the Oscar Pistorius trial. Of course, last week we had Advocate Gerard on, and we had a couple of requests to discuss the case, and we thought that, considering the fact that Gerard was actually a part of the prosecution team, we thought that it would be a good idea to remind ourselves a decade later of exactly what went down in that case and to revisit some of the facts as they stand today. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, forensic psychologist Gerard Labuschagne, former head of the SAPS Forensic Psychology Unit, and now head of LNS Threat Management. Gerard was, of course, like I said, part of the prosecution team, so he's bringing all of his expertise and knowledge on the case to tonight's discussion. Good evening, Gerard. How's it going?
Good evening, Paul. Good evening to all the listeners. Going pretty well. Recovering from a touch of flu, so again, I'll be clearing my throat a lot, and yeah.
Guys, don't forget to subscribe to Profiler Africa for top-tier true crime content. Become a member for exclusive extra access. Okay, Gerard, so this has been happening a little bit where my camera has been acting out, so I'm going to hopefully just fix the problem right here and there, like that, and then I can join us once again. There we go. The gremlins. You know, it's always weird with technology. Things never, ever happen. And then all of a sudden, one night, for some reason, just something strange just starts happening out of the blue, and that's what's happening tonight. Just a reminder to subscribe to Profiler Africa for top-tier true crime content. You can become a member for exclusive extras, extra access, and of course, it's all really a part of helping us to produce the channel. Your contributions are greatly appreciated, and they do go to good use. You can also join our Patreon group at patreon.com/Profiler Africa. And as always, I'd like to welcome everyone to the chat. Immediately, thank you very much to Brett Lane for your super chat. Maybe, Jared, before we jump into the discussion, because Brett's sent us a super chat right at the top of the show, and we always want to encourage people to do that as we're going. Shall we answer Brett's question before we get started on the Oscar case? Well, here it is anyway. Let's do it. Here it is. Hello. Have you heard the call from the serial killer on the Howard Stern show? In your opinion, is that real? And do you think that serial killers watch serial killer related shows like yours, and why?
Yeah, I'm sure some do. You know, we've definitely had cases that we were investigating where the guys would follow what's in the media, in the newspapers back in the days. We had newspapers on the internet. So that's quite I think, a fairly common thing, that they'll be definitely following news about their own case. Would they watch shows? I can imagine they probably would, you know, if they're committing crimes and people are talking about the kind of crimes they commit. Yeah, and I mean, that's you know, people have often said, you know, is that, you know, what's the impact of that on teaching, you know, all these true crime dramas? Do they teach criminals to function more effectively, to get away with things, to know what the police are looking for? Oh, I guess there is an element of that. I suppose it also keeps the police on their toes to develop new techniques all the time. But I think we're also reaching the point in forensic sciences where it's really difficult to leave no trace. It's almost impossible. So as long as you have people doing the job properly, they have the resource and training and tools, you know, you should always be able to get forensic evidence. But yeah, I do think these guys probably do watch case. I mean, why not? They probably want to learn about themselves and why they do things as much as we want to know why they do things. And so they probably do, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so hi to everyone. Hello, Henry. Welcome for joining us. Hello to Lana, who's joining us from Cape Town. Dr. Simone, who's joining us from a rainy Johannesburg and reminds us that Reeva would have turned 42 this year. All right, so that's a good maybe catalyst for us to jump into the conversation, Gerard. It's been a decade since Reeva was murdered, and a lot has happened since then. A big, very public, kind of globally televised trial, various stages that we'll unpack in that. And of course, now Oscar is out on parole, which is one of the more recent and apparently in a new relationship. So we'll unpack all of that. But I thought where we could start, Gerard, is let's kind of go right back to 11 years ago and remind ourselves of kind of who Oscar Pistorius was, because it's easy to forget kind of what a massive national icon he was really becoming.
Yeah, it's actually, I see it's 12 years ago, actually. It's 2013.
Oh, is it 12 years ago? Sorry, yes, you're right.
Yeah,
Okay,
just over. Yeah, look, I mean, Oscar, I mean, he was obviously one of, at a time when I don't think we had a lot of South African heroes at that point. And he definitely was one that I think everybody was proud of, from his obviously overcoming his disability, becoming not just a Paralympian, but a Olympian in the able-bodied Olympics. He was like, on all these well-known talk shows, Jay Leno, Piers Morgan, Larry King, 2008 Times 100, BBC Sportsman Personality of the Year in 2007. And of course, was quite, well known for sort of supporting, little kids who had amputees, who were amputees also, numerous gold medals. So I think, just somebody that everybody just liked, that we couldn't really see.
The first double amputee sprinter to compete against able-bodied athletes, of course, in 2012, which was such it was such incredibly big news back then.
And in the end, I think he won 23 gold medals in professional sporting events. I mean, that's really, amazing. And he participated in the 2011 able-bodied World Athletics Championships and the 2012 Summer Olympics, 2012 Paralympics, and he got gold in the 400-meter sprints, set a world record. Gold in 4x100 relay. This is now in this Paralympics, set a world record. Silver in the 200 sprints and set a world record. So I mean, he was one of these people that Nike was sponsoring him. I think he had like $2 million a year sponsorship just from Nike alone. So very successful, competing with people who didn't have disabilities successfully. So celebrity, sports hero. And of course, one of our homegrown,
Now, obviously, I mean, you do actually speak on this case now, and so your knowledge runs beyond just the trial and the psychological. And you were there, of course, on the day. You were at the house. You took a detour and headed over to the house on the day. The one component about Oscar that maybe we should talk about as well is, yes, there was lots of positive, but there was some negative as well, and there were some warning signs. What were some of those, Gerard?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot that's came out after the trial happened, so this isn't necessarily stuff that most people would have known about. I think I do recall back in February 2009, it was in the media that he had a boating accident. So he was piloting a boat or driving a boat, suspected that there was alcohol involved, which is, in terms of the eyes of the law, just as much of a crime as drunk driving. There was an accident, and he got some injuries, etc. So that's Feb 2009. Then sort of September, he's arrested for assault during a party at his house. I think that charge was withdrawn. September of 2012, he fires a shot through a sunroof. That became part of the trial against him later on. November 2012 was a defamation charge against him after he threatened someone that he claims has slept with his girlfriend. Also November 2012, he threatens allegedly to break the legs of Mark Batchelor, who was a well-known soccer player. January 2013, the accidental discharge of a firearm in Tasha's restaurant. That also became part of the criminal trial against him. And then, of course, Feb 2013, we have the shooting. So brushes with the law. And as three of these things then became part of the trial against him that we all know of.
Absolutely. Okay, so now talk to us, just introduce for everyone. Again, this is something that came up a bit last week in our discussion with Kerry. If you need to grab a bit of water, then do, Gerard. Just tell us a little bit about, just remind us what your involvement in the case was, and just to make sure that, just to prove that you were there. Here we go. There he is. There's Advocate Harry doing his thing, and right in the background there with a cool looking tash is Gerard doing his thing. So just remind us what your involvement was in the case, Gerard.
All right. So back in 2013, obviously I was still in the police. I was the head of the investigative psychology section. as people know, is the profiling unit of the police. And on that very morning, I mean, I used to get to work like, sometimes 6:30. We normally started work at 7:30. And I was there early because I had to go do something at the office. And I was getting ready to go testify at a serial rape trial in Soweto. So while I was at the office, I get a phone call from a colleague from the forensic laboratory saying, listen, Oscar's shot his girlfriend. I'm like, okay, well, is the body still on the scene? At that point, the body had been removed. So, from a profiling point of view, to go to the scene when the body's not there, I'd rather wait and look at the photographs, and also, as I said, I had to go testify. So I didn't go to the scene. I jumped in my car and headed off to Soweto to go testify, and I'm probably 2/3 of the way there. And I get a phone call from that prosecutor saying, the case is not going to go on today, so no need to come through to Soweto. So I turn around, and by that point, it's on the radio, Oscar shot his girlfriend, there's rumors floating around about mistaken identity, thought it was a burglar, et cetera, already kind of on the go. And I'm kind of thinking about this, and I'm going, okay, well, if they do end up prosecuting him, and he doesn't plead guilty, he's going to have, really one or two little defenses. You can try the sort of temporary insanity or non-pathological criminal capacity. I was so overwhelmed by my emotions. We had an argument. I got overwhelmed and I shot it. I didn't realize what I was doing. Or plead guilty. I mean, what else really could you try? Because it didn't sound like a self-defense. It didn't sound like she attacked him or something. So I knew that if this were to go to the point of criminal prosecution, is going to have to use a psychological defense. Even mistaken identity is sort of a psychological defense. And they would have to be calling psychologists, psychiatrists at the trial, which means those people probably would be assessing Oscar months, weeks later, as they decide what the strategy is going to be for trial purposes. So I decided that it's probably a good strategy to go spend some time with Oscar. I wouldn't be allowed to obviously necessarily do a formal interview, but if I could at least say that I had eyes on Oscar for a period of time on the day in question, I would be in a pretty good position to confirm or refute whatever the defense psychologists or psychiatrists might want to say about his behavior on the day. But they would be seeing him months later, like I said, or weeks later at best. So I phoned the station commissioner and I said, this is who I am. This is what I suggest. And he said, sure, come through. So I didn't go to the house on the first day because Oscar, at that point in time, was at the station, Boschkop police station, down Linwood Road. So I went straight to Boschkop. I asked Lieutenant Colonel Jan de Lange, who's been on our show numerous times, who's my head investigator. I said, Jannie, you go to the crime scene, just check what's going on there. And I then kind of met up with Oscar at the police station. And really, most of the time I spent with him was traveling from the police station to the Mamelodi East Clinic for his medical J88 medical examination. That's a forensic medical examination to see, does he have scratches on him? What's his body state of, are the injuries, etc. So I kind of was in the car with him from the police station. There was 2 cops in the front and then me in the back seat with Oscar. And then we drove to the clinic and probably spent about, in total, maybe 3 hours, 4 hours, because we just waited for a long time at the clinic and then drove back with him. So I did introduce myself in the car. I said, look, I'm Gerard Labuschagne. And as some of you might or might not know, that Mickey Pistorius is actually his aunt. So I said to him, look, Oscar, this is what I do. I have the same position that your aunt used to have, so that he knows kind of who I am and what I do. I said, you don't have to say anything to me. And he was very quiet and somber in the car. And sometimes it looked like there were journalists about to sort of drive. Because, I mean, when we left the police station, there was like hundreds of journalists around the police station. There's actually a lot of video footage of us driving out the police station. So, as we would drive, sometimes there would be a car that looked like it had paparazzi. I said, look, Oscar, I think there's a car coming with journalists. And he would put his head down. And once the car passes, I would say, okay, it's safe to look up. When we got to the clinic, I mean, as I said, I wasn't, it wasn't going to be a formal interview. Tell me what happened. So I didn't ask any of those questions. So I just, how are you doing? How are you feeling right now? Do you want to get something to eat? It's going to be a long day. Are you thirsty? We both went to the same school, albeit he went there a number of years after I went there, Pretoria Boys High. So we chatted about teachers and I think rugby. So we had general chit-chats, but it gave me the opportunity to observe him, his demeanor. Was he behaving strangely, for example, or was he behaving appropriately? And he was very somber and at times tearful and crying. Nothing inappropriate. Didn't notice anything weird, nothing inappropriate. And that was kind of my time with him. So I only actually went to the crime scene about a day or two later that I could understand looking at photographs is one thing, but going to the scene, even after the fact, at least lets you understand how things fit into each other in the house, because a photograph is never quite exactly the territory. So I did go to the scene about 2 or 3 days later. What's interesting, when he testified, he said that I met him at the house and I told him I was there to help him. Which, I mean, as I said, there's lots of video footage of me leaving the police station with him. And I think when I see one or two of the pictures, maybe, in our collection here, I don't know if you include that. But that was really it. And then I kind of didn't really have any involvement. Then fast forward when the case is allocated to Gerard Nel, and they were preparing for trial. Gerard Nel being the prosecutor we had on last week. And Gerry's office was next door to our building. So I went there and said, hey, Gerry, this is who I am. This is what I did on the day. This was the purpose of me going on the day. I'm at your assistance if you need me. And he kind of said, look, I want you to sit in the courtroom with me as part of my team of detectives as much as possible. He wanted me to be there every day of the trial. My general was very reluctant. And he said, well, can't just be there every day. But if you need him, he can be there. So I spent, I don't know, I have to guess, maybe during the trial, 2/3 of the trial, I was present in the courtroom.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was kind of my role, really. A lot, on the day one, then nothing until the actual trial started.
Okay. Now, should we talk about what happened first, or would you rather we talk about what happened at the scene before we get back to kind of what Oscar's account was, and then what the evidence led folks to believe? Where do you think we should start there, Gerard?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it was Valentine's Day, the early morning. So people thought it was Valentine's evening going into the morning of the 15th. It was actually the morning of Valentine's Day, 2013. She'd spent the night at Oscar's house, which was at quite a nice estate in the east of Pretoria near Silver Lakes, which many people know. They'd only actually met on about the 4th of November. So basically, December, January, they'd only really known each other for 3 months. So this wasn't a long-standing relationship there. You can see there the red circle, that's the house he stayed in. On the right-hand side, that's sort of close up. I think if you go to the next picture, if I recall correctly in your slides. Yeah, you see that's that yellow circle on the right-hand side. That is the room and the balcony. So that's Oscar's bedroom. And if you look on the top of the roof, you'll see the sort of layout of the walls. At the back of it was the bathroom, quite a big bathroom area, which we'll get to in a moment. So they'd kind of had just been at home the night before, had something to eat, gone to bed. And long story short, the early hours of the morning, Oscar wakes up. He didn't have aircon, so he had like the sliding doors open. Remember, obviously, South Africa, Feb is midsummer. He had a big fan, like on big tripod legs, kind of half straddling the track of where the sliding door was, and a smaller fan underneath it. So he woke up in the early hours of the morning and basically, there you can see those, decided to bring the fans in and close that. And as he does that, it's when he hears something, what he perceives from the bathroom.
Now, sorry, Gerard, just for our kind of international views, just this complex as well. I mean, obviously, Johannesburg is a city that's a little bit, the Gauteng is a bit notorious for crime. But this is a gated community. This is a pretty secure complex where, burglaries and break-ins, there would have been CCTV here, a fair amount, I would imagine. I mean, and entry through a security gate as well.
Yeah, there was physical security permanently on site at the front entrance. You can't just drive into this estate. You have to there's a boom and a guard, and they phone the people you're supposed to be visiting and check that you're allowed to have the visitors to let them in. I think they did have a roving patrol. So it's it's fairly upmarket and fairly high security. Is always security guards present on the property.
Okay, sorry to interrupt there.
All right, so just jump back to those pictures you had up now, because they kind of really display things quite nicely.
Okay, let me. What I'll do is shall I show? I've got a schematic here of the actual.
Yes.
of the bathroom. Okay, yeah, in the bedroom.
Because that's the bedroom and the bath. Yes, that's fine. So you see the
Okay.
little yellow circle on the right. That's where the that I put that there as indicating the fan. So it seems like, if I recall correctly, Reeva's stuff was on the left-hand side of the bed. Oscar apparently had been sleeping on the right-hand side of the bed, if we're looking at it now. And so he goes to the balcony, pulls on the fan, hears something coming from the bathroom, thinks somebody's there. He then goes around the bed to the left-hand side, and you can just see where the pistol is, and gets the gun. I don't know why the gun was on that side. And then says to Reeva, call the cops. At that point, I think he sort of whispers it to her, says it quietly. Then he kind of walks down the passage, gets to where that red dot is, and he says he thought somebody was coming out, and then he fired the 4 shots through the door. So it was actually through the little toilet that was in the big bathroom. That's sort of the short description. I mean, he changed his version a few times during the trial. So this is kind of at the foot of the bed. There's this hi-fi system. He said the hi-fi had like a little LED light that kind of is quite bright when it's pitch dark. So he'd put something on there to cover it. You'll see there's 2 cell phones on top of the hi-fi. You'll see a set of watches. One of those watches went missing. Seems like a policeman stole one of those watches. There's a collection of Oakleys there. That case just to the right of it would be the door leaving his bedroom to go to the rest of the upstairs portion of the house. So there's the left-hand side of the bed. You can see the holster. Those obviously are Reeva's sandals, because Oscar, I know how to express it tactfully, didn't have feet. Obviously, his prosthetics, you don't put flip-flops on. That's Reeva's bag on the left-hand side there. So normally he said he would sleep on this side of the bed, but because his shoulder was sore, I think the left-hand shoulder was sore, so he wanted to sleep on his right so he could face Reeva. He was sleeping on the other side closest to the window, apparently, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
There we saw the fans that he brought in.
Okay, now I
There you can actually see, sorry, jump, just look at the bottom, this left-hand photograph. You see there's that case of watches there? You'll see that 1, 2, 3, 4. If you go back to the other slide where the hi-fi was, you'll see that one, there you go.
No way.
One of them was missing. And when they realized it at the scene, they kind of got all the cops who were there, searched them, couldn't find it. But that was, of course, one of the definite blunders that the cops had made at the crime scene, which, definitely came out.
And we will talk about that, because it seems like it was a bit of a free-for-all on the morning, Gerard. Like, if you were a policeman in the near vicinity, it seems like that chances are you were there picking up or, wandering through evidence without covers on your shoes.
Yeah, there was not good crime scene control. We'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah. Okay, so fans, now the next shot does show the bathroom. So here's just, for the squeamish, this does show some of the blood spatter, etc.
Yeah, you won't see a body.
You won't see anything graphic, no.
Yeah, so that blood spatter would have been when he was carrying her out. It was sort of arterial spurting, which kind of continued down the stairs. You can see that arterial spurting is obviously when an artery is being penetrated, and it literally spurts out. So you get this like stream of dots. So right, so basically what you're seeing here with that's the left-hand photograph, that's kind of where he was standing when he fired the shots at the little toilet door. You see the window here, that's what he thought he heard sliding open, the sort of sliding and the sort of thunk as that door. So he thought, oh my goodness, people have entered into the bathroom. That's what he heard when he was closing bringing that fan in from the sort of door, the sliding door of his bedroom.
Was it easy to climb? Was it easily accessible? I mean, is there a ledge beneath that window outside or anything?
Look, it's second story.
Just straight up second story here.
He said he thinks there was ladders out there that contractors might have left that could have been used, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
Now, obviously, all of his evidence is available on YouTube because the whole trial, as you know, was broadcast. So it is all there on YouTube, the whole trial. So that's the door, the toilet, the actual toilet door. The markings A, B, C, D was the 4 shots that went through it. Obviously, he broke down the door when he realized Reeva probably is in there. So the door had to sort of be reconstructed. So this is not a real body, as you point out there. And this was one of the reconstructions of how he described how sort of Reeva was when he finally broke through the door, because the door had been locked from the inside. Hence, he had to break it down, I think, with the cricket bat to get in, and he could reach in and unlock the door with his from the inside, reaching through the panels that he'd knocked down.
Okay.
So
Guys,
as you can
don't
see, it's a
forget
very
to...
tiny, that area
Sorry,
is
George.
incredibly tiny. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Guys, just don't forget to hit the like and subscribe if you're tuning in tonight. I am keeping a note of all of your questions, and we will be discussing your questions as we go, and keeping some towards the end as well.
Yeah,
Sorry, Gerard.
definitely.
Yes, so it is a tiny little bathroom, like you were saying. Sorry.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, if someone's standing by, and this comes relevant later with the legal aspects, if someone was standing behind that door and was busy opening it or not, and you fire 4 shots at it, you can't say you didn't think you're going to hit the person. And that kind of becomes legally, these little legal aspects have become quite important later on. Okay. Right. So that's just a reconstruction, the ballistics guy. So the ballistics guy here was Chris Mangena from Ballistics and SAPS Forensics. I think he's now probably a colonel, I think. And he did a very good job. I mean, Chris was quite well lauded at the trial for his very, very good work in the ballistics reconstruction and the evidence that he gave. So you can literally see on the right-hand photograph, you know, again, I mean, if you're standing anywhere in front of that door, I mean, you're going to get hit by a bullet. Yeah. Even if you're sitting on the toilet, you're going to probably at least hit by 2 of those bullets.
Yeah, and not hard to not hard to know that if you're aware of the geography of the bathroom and the size of the.
That's your bathroom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, then just
so
some
that's
more
just
of
another
the
form of reconstructing with using a laser as opposed to a rod or as opposed to strings.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's just, again, the bathroom side. Obviously, the disarray, the panels of the door knocked down. In the top right-hand side of that picture next to the toilet, you can see a little magazine rack. Now, that was, ultimately he said when he thought someone was coming out of that bathroom, that's when he fired the shots. Well, remember, the door was locked because he said he had to break down the panels and unlock it from the inside. So it couldn't have been the door that was opening. So he said, well, it must have been the magazine rack that was being shifted, and that made him think the door was actually about to be opened.
Okay.
Also see Maurice Hubert, one of our longtime favorites, is watching again today. All right, so there you see the pistol that he used. I think it was a copy of basically a Beretta 92 phone over there. There's the cricket bat on the right-hand side that he said he went back to get when he realized this could be Reeva, and he used that to break down the actual door.
Okay. And then just some extra shots of the bat.
And actually, that bat he used to light. You remember when we showed you the picture earlier where Oscar's Oakley's cabinet was? That was right where by his bedroom door. So he actually used to put the cricket bat sort of lying down that the door couldn't be opened, like almost like a physical stopper. To stop anybody from outside his bedroom door coming in. That's as if I understand correctly. Okay, there's the magazine rack. There's the pistol. Yeah, so one of those. Yeah, so he had black talon rounds, which was essentially a form of hollow point. Just for the record, hollow points are perfectly legal in South Africa. You'll get some policemen that'll tell you it's illegal for you to have hollow points. Policemen aren't allowed to have hollow points, except if you are in the special task force or a specialized unit, and they're issued to you. But for your standard SAPS members, you're only allowed to have normal ball ammunition, that sort of rounded copper full metal jacket stuff. Hollow points are very effective for a couple of reasons. I suggest if you do have a self-defense firearm, you should be carrying hollow points. Firstly, that if you're ever in the horrific position where your life depends on you shooting someone else, because that's the only option left to you to save your life or someone else's life, then you should be shooting with whatever is the most lethal type of round, and a hollow point is the most effective for self-defense. Hits, kind of curls open, so all the energy is transferred into that bullet, and it doesn't over-penetrate. And that's one of the other benefits of a hollow point. A normal round-nosed bullet, which is the standard issue for military and police, will go through a human being. So if there's somebody else, if you're in the home situation, you can have over-penetration, which means it goes straight through your person you're shooting, and could hit somebody else who you didn't intend to shoot. So that's another reason why hollow points are actually the most effective thing. So I don't at all judge Oscar for using having black talons in his gun. That's what he should have, and that's what I recommend everybody to actually have in their self-defense firearms.
Okay, are these the actual ballistics?
I believe those are probably Oscar's black talons. Yeah.
Okay. Then we had.
I can't remember which of these two phones. One is, I think
this is Oscar's. This is Oscar's.
Yeah. So we've seen one and one.
Sorry.
Right. What else we got
Back,
here?
Oscar,
Cell
and then we've got,
phone. Cell
I think this
phone.
is the other phone. I think this is Reeva's phone.
So basically what you can see is now this is as you've left Oscar's bedroom, which we do on the left-hand side of this picture. You go past a couple other bedrooms, and these are the stairs going downstairs to the front entrance. Now these arrow markers are typically used in forensics, and Marius, correct me if I'm wrong, for marking blood, specifically blood if I'm not mistaken. And you can't really get the picture here, but you could really nicely see the spurt, the arc of the blood, the arterial spurt, as he would have been carrying her down the stairs, which obviously indicates to us that she was still alive, her heart was pumping. And you get this, I mean, it's not nice, but it's beautiful from a forensics point of view, this spurt that hits the wall and actually stops there. And right at the bottom where this red circle is where Reeva's body was. And where she basically was then found by the police when the police were summoned to, or the ambulance people were summoned to the scene.
All right, so that gives everyone a sense of then what Oscar's story was and what some of the evidence started to suggest. How did police come to be at the scene? How did the reporting go that morning?
So what kind of first, Oscar does, we have 2 phone calls from the security guards, the front security desk or whatever at the room gate. The first one, he says, they phone, is everything okay? He's like, no, everything's fine. I think that's the words that we use. And then the second call, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, he answers and Oscar is just crying. So Oscar first phones, I think, a friend of his who stayed in the complex. In fact, it's interesting, he never actually phoned the cops, sorry. So he first phoned a friend of his who's in the complex, and I think that friend, phoned, I don't know if it was the ambulance or the police. But essentially, of course, the police did eventually arrive. She's declared obviously dead at the can't recall if paramedics were there. But long story short, she's not alive. And of course, the police then document the crime scene. So she wasn't taken to hospital because I think maybe the paramedics would have declared her dead. And then obviously you don't move the body once that's happened.
Okay. Who was the talk to us a little bit about the police coming into the space then, because as I understand it, there were a number of issues throughout the course of the morning where you had essentially a number of forensic teams kind of working over one another.
Yeah. So one of the big problems is this wasn't treated normally because of who it was. So we actually had the station commissioner from Boschkop Police Station who came out to manage the crime scene, which is you don't get station commissioners doing that. Under normal practices and procedures, station commissioners don't do that. So that's, again, deviating from the norm. Why are you doing that? Why are you treating this case special? Then, of course, you had the guy the crime scene guy on standby, Benny van Staden, whose job it was to come out and process the crime scene. But then what happened is, as this thing kind of escalated and it became on the news and the provincial commissioner hears about it, the national commissioner hears about it, you start getting the sort of provincial crime scene team, the province's specialized team, being dispatched. So they get there after Benny has done his processing of the crime scene. And they start to sort of also take pictures and of stuff. But now you're taking pictures of a scene that's already been documented by another crime scene guy, who, once he's in the process of documenting, obviously then you do start to shift exhibits around to photograph the phone that's underneath the towel. That's the normal procedure as you process a scene. So if you arrive there, Johnny Come Lately, as the second group of people, you're already documenting a scene that's been changed in the normal processing of the first guy. And the national crime scene team comes out and they do that. So we ended up with 3 different sets of crime scene photographs that are all different. So again, it also came back to this case really did change a lot of procedures and ways that things are done. So that was good, some good that came out of this. And this is a case we used to teach a lot about to people, about how not to do things at crime scenes, etc. So it became a good teaching case. Sadly, it's about the death of another human being. But so basically, the new procedures are that if the provincial team arrives, they don't document anything. They just assist the actual crime scene guy on duty in any way that person wants them to assist. So that kind of was an important change. Then we just had a lot of cops who just shouldn't have been there. And I think because it was Oscar, I think that there was something like within 2 days, like 70 different members of SAPS who were on that scene, from uniform people detective, crime scene people, like I said, to ballistics people from forensics laboratory, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the person in charge of the crime scene, that the head of the police station, just wasn't doing a good job. So when Yanni, my colleague, who I'd asked to go to the crime scene, gets there, he's like, what the hell's going on here? Who are all these people?
Yeah.
And basically pretty much called it to order and said, who are you and what are you doing here? Piss off. Who are you? What are you doing here? Okay, you can stay. You piss off. So kind of, cut the wheat from the chaff is the expression. And of course, also
I can imagine Yanni
guys
doing that as well.
Yeah, and it's like,
I
why
would
aren't you
leave.
guys wearing any PPEs?
Yeah.
So at least got them to put on, those little crime scene booties, that you're not dragging in and out evidence from the scene. Which in this case ultimately didn't make such a big difference because it wasn't a whodunit, it was a why done it. If this was an unknown suspect who fled the scene, then it would be a totally different story. So yes, there were bugger-ups. How many of those impacted this case based on the dynamics of this case? Very few, thankfully. But anyway, so chasing people out, that's why I was glad I wasn't actually there on that day. I went there a day or two later, so I wasn't anybody on the day in question. But we had other things like the ballistics guy
sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so we also had, like, for example, the ballistics guy. I mean, a ballistics guy is a specialist guy in firearms, and he kind of picks up the gun without gloves on, and we're like, dude, you should have gloves on. Now, luckily, again, it wasn't like an unknown suspect who'd fled the scene, and we're going to try and identify him through the DNA on the gun. So that's why I said another stupid thing, that he just wasn't following protocol. But it didn't affect this case because Oscar wasn't disputing that that's his gun, and he wasn't disputing that he pulled the trigger. So bugger-ups, yes, 100% sure. Did they make a difference in this particular case? Thank goodness, no. But of course, those were all brought out during the trial, making it look like the police. Because also Oscar says that, how the scene is pictured in the pictures we've shown you wasn't how it was. And he was using the fact that the police had messed up and changed things and stolen things to try and bolster his argument that that wasn't how the scene was, and therefore, etc.
Let's not forget that a little glove not fitting, managed to get OJ off. So in a big media show trial like this, a trial that becomes a spectacle like this, then these little details become so magnified, don't they?
Yeah. So just never deviate from the procedures, because everybody's going to ask you, why did you deviate from the normal procedures? Was there favoritism? I think in the beginning it was actually a case of favoritism towards Oscar. They were
because he was there for ages as well. Shouldn't he? He was supposed to be whisked away, but he was left to kind of hang around the scene and pick up evidence if he felt like it.
Yeah. At one point, they were even going to let him go shower before he went to the police station, until one of the cops said, "No, hang on, stop this nonsense. No, he can't go for a shower until he's been for a J88 medical examination." So order was brought. But we should never have had that disorder in the first bloody place. It was really just totally not. It's not like people didn't know what to do. People just weren't following the proper procedures.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, from immediately there's a media scrum going on, but immediately there's also, the police. Everyone kind of wants to get in on it. It seems like that was the case. Yeah. It's like this was the big news echoing around the city in the morning, and anyone that felt like they could go and check it out was going to do that.
They even wanted to take him on that very same day, arrest him and take him immediately to get released on bail, which is like, but that's not normally how we do things. Again, why are you showing favoritism? So the beginning was really, I think, the bug-ups were almost like a bit perhaps favoritism in a way, and just curiosity by a lot of cops who had no business being there.
Okay. So anyway, we do then on the 19th to the 22nd, we do have the bail hearing, and Oscar is granted bail. And then... and then the lawyers all go to work.
Yeah. So look, I mean, it wasn't a surprise that he was going to get bail. I mean, where's he going to go to? He's a high international figure. Everybody knows what he looks like. So, but because they made the charge like a premeditated murder, and they pushed it for a formal bail application where you have evidence and he has to get into the box and say something, etc. That's why it took a couple of days, the actual formal bail hearing. But again, partly that was smart because we got a version of events that was, and whatever you say or whatever document you submit, an affidavit as part of your bail application, can be used as during the trial. So if you say something in the trial or in your evidence that contradicts what you said during the bail application, that can be used against you. And that is what also happened, to say, but you said something different when you testified, or when you gave, I can't remember if it was testified or was an affidavit, but basically saying that you said something different under oath or in an affidavit compared to what you're saying now during the trial, which changed once or twice during the actual trial.
Okay. Before we'll get into the trial now, guys, thank you so much if you're joining us for the live. It's always wonderful to have you with us so you can take part in the chat and pose your questions. Of course, you have a great opportunity to ask whatever you'd like of a man who was very much involved in the case, especially as the trial unfolded, as we've discussed. So, Gerard, should we jump to a couple of the questions at this point? And
perhaps just to point out that the issue of bail, people often think, people are arrested and they're back on the streets. Bail is a very important thing for a couple of reasons. If we didn't give people bail, we'd have even 10 times worse overcrowding in our prisons than we already have awaiting trial. And bail is not about punishment. It's not about you did a bad thing, you should not be out awaiting your trial. It's really about, is this a person who's not going to pitch up for their trial? Will they interfere with witnesses? Will they perhaps tamper with evidence that hasn't been yet discovered? Will they flee the country, etc.? And if a person, is not a risk for any of those, and it's not necessarily, then there's a pretty good chance that they'll probably get bail. So I think it was absolutely fine and probably appropriate that Oscar should get bail, because we don't not give bail because we really don't like someone. That's his favoritism. So I think it's quite right that he did get bail at that time.
Okay, well, I think the first question we're going to answer, because this person's got their studying to do, and maybe we can help them if we get to it early. Hi, Gerard. We're writing a criminology test about this case tomorrow. So hopefully, if everyone in that class is tuned in now, do tune in, guys, and get your questions in. And I want to know if the weapon effect may have played a part in Oscar shooting Reeva, the weapon effect. Are you aware of what the weapon effect is? It's a psychological phenomenon where the mere presence of a weapon increases aggressive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, first studied by Leonard Berkowitz and Anthony LePage in 1967. Yay. Thanks for the internet.
Look, we do, from a risk assessment or threat assessment point of view, yes, if you have someone who's making threats and a firearm is present or part of the threats, it increases the likelihood that something's going to happen. But I don't think the mere presence of a weapon without the other factors I don't think it's the weapon that causes people to be more dangerous. If you have an angry person who has a weapon, then of course that's a bad combination. So it's just perhaps just different ways of seeing the same thing. So if I understand the question correctly.
Okay, great. Well, I hope that helps. Then we go on to Melissa Harden. Thank you so much for your super chat. We appreciate you. How would you characterize Oscar Pistorius' psychological state and decision-making processes immediately before and during the events? We touched on this a little, but maybe you can unpack a little.
Psychological state. Well, I mean, again, the judge never said what she felt the reason for the crime was. Mistaken identity, or did he know he was shooting Reeva intentionally? And I don't think we're ever going to know that. And the only person who will know that is Oscar. I mean, it's again difficult to say. I have no reason to believe that there was any diagnoses issues. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever felt that Oscar has any mental health issues, and probably doesn't.
Sure.
So I mean, I would imagine. I mean, afterwards when I saw him, he was obviously very, very upset. I think the gravity of what had happened had really kicked in, and he was appropriately sad. So again, I didn't see anything unusual.
I mean, what psychological evaluations were done on him?
None. So the only reason why in a criminal trial, why there would be a psychological evaluation is what we typically say when we send someone for observation. So, but that's when you suspect that during the crime itself, he was unable to determine right from wrong, or he could, but he was unable to act in accordance with that determination. Or you feel now he can't be put on trial 2 months later, 6 months later, there's something wrong with him then. So nobody believed nobody raised the issue that they felt that Oscar during the incident was experiencing like a mental health break. There were emotions. Yes, of course, there's emotions in any violent crime, fear, anger, whatever. But nobody felt, we think there's something wrong with Oscar like hearing voices, or something else of that nature that would need him to be assessed. So there was no reason for him to be assessed. Beyond that, I think they, towards the sentencing, did bring someone to come and testify. You'll see later on during the trial, when it was the defense's turn to call their witnesses after the prosecution had finished, they called Meryl Foster, who was a very well-known and well-respected forensic psychiatrist, and Gerard spoke about her quite highly last week. And she said that, he had this generalized anxiety disorder from like a few months old. I don't know how she got determined that, a few months or a year or two old, and kind of implied that was sort of present during the incident, not a cause of the incident, but kind of was present. But unfortunately, the minute you bring something like a mental health issue like that, even like that, anxiety disorder, in relation to the incident, that it played some role, not causing necessarily, but influencing the person's behavior at the time, unfortunately, the Criminal Procedure Act is very strict, and you will then have the person sent for observation. And I don't think that was their intention, because they said, no, we don't want our clients sent for observation. We just want this kind of put on the record. Harry said, sorry, but the Criminal Procedure Act is very, very strict. It's not optional. If this issue is touched on, the judge or the magistrate has to send the person for observation. And then he did eventually go to Westkopie's psychiatric hospital in Pretoria, which is a government hospital that does forensic assessments also. And he didn't spend 30 days in hospital. He was allowed to go in every day and meet with the sort of social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and the team that had to assess him. And basically, long story short, to that answer, came back finding that he didn't have generalized anxiety disorder. There was nothing influencing his behavior on the night in question from a psychological perspective that influenced his ability to determine right from wrong and act in accordance with that. And that's obviously why his trial progressed. So again, that doesn't mean there weren't emotions involved and fear during the incident, and maybe anger, I don't know, but nothing that robbed him of his ability to determine right from wrong and make decisions about that.
Okie dokie. Well, we've also got an answer to your question, Gerard, which is great. I mean, feedback. Love it. From Marius, yes, Gerard, many experts do use the directional stickers to identify bloodstains. There we go. Thank you, Marius.
Learn something.
All right. We will get back to some more of your questions. I see we've got some of the folks who... There are definitely people that do not... Well, either they don't think Oscar did it, or they're just still Oscar fans, And I guess there are those people that like married dudes in prison and stuff, But it's already we're getting one or two comments. Oscar, we've got from Moise, relax, start your new life, we love you. Okay. Well, he is starting his new life. One last one just before we get back to talking about the trial, from Shelley Footer, sent us a super sticker. We really appreciate you, Shelley. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. All right, so to the trial. Okay, tell us a bit about the build-up. What goes into it? What went into it from your perspective? And then let's talk about kind of what went down.
So luckily, as I said, I had a brief consult with Harry in the lead up to it. I'm sure I must have had meetings with him closer to the start of the trial. But basically, I just had to go there and sit there every day and listen to what comes out, give my input to Harry. Of course, when it's the defense's turn to call witnesses, they don't tell us beforehand who they're calling. So in South Africa, how it works is long before the trial starts, you have to give a copy of the whole docket, the police case file, to the defense. So they know exactly what you've got, what, your experts, if there's reports, that's all there, and they get to review that. They again get to compile the defense. They don't give us anything beforehand. So what would happen is, when it became their chance to call their witnesses, we would literally be sitting there, we'd look and see who walks into the courtroom, and I'd like, anybody know who that is? Oh, that's Dr. So-and-so, he's a anthropologist, or he's a this. So, Harry kind of had to have this team sitting there, because when the defense starts to call their witnesses, we need to be able to very quickly respond, hear he has to have the advisors who can advise him what this person is testifying about, how we're going to cross-examine. So that was kind of what happened. So, but I think before we get too much in the details, like you said earlier, this was the first time that the complete trial was televised in South African history. So we'd had where the judgment of a case was televised, or the sentencing of a case was televised, or maybe when a particular witness was testifying in a big high-profile case. So we've had bits and pieces of cases where there were cameras in the courtroom. but never from start to finish, literally live. The other ones typically was recording, and then in the nightly news you would see it. This was live. There was a 24-hour Oscar channel going. So this
Yeah,
is all
absolutely. At
live.
Open Brew,
The
I
people,
used to work at Open Brew, and I mean, they took over a whole studio for the duration of
yeah.
the trial, and it was a big thing.
And I think it was a good thing because it does help. Look, this wasn't a normal trial, don't get me wrong, but people perhaps just had a better understanding of what goes on in a courtroom. And as I said, Harry said last week, people talked about dolus eventualis, which we would never have spoken about that. So I think in the end it was good. I mean, it was, yes, you sat in a courtroom that was completely filled, with journalists packed. They actually had to have an overflow courtroom next door where people would watch on screens for all the journalists. For me, I think once the trial starts, you
I
kind
mean,
of forget about all these
some
people.
some iconic images did come out of the trial as well.
Yeah,
though.
that's
This
during the
is one
bail
of it.
application. Yeah,
I think we saw these images all over the world.
yeah. So, but what was interesting, was perhaps the most disrupting, is as somebody would testify during the trial, you'd hear all the journalists with their laptops on their laps typing away. So it sounded like little beetles scurrying across the floor. And then once the person would stop talking, then the typing would stop. And as the person would start talking again, then clickety, clickety, clickety. That was for me perhaps the most disturbing thing, this plethora of journalists. So the role players, as you see there in the middle, was Judge Masipa. At that point in time, she'd been a very well-respected judge, a good reputation. She had two assessors sitting with her. So those, I think, were both magistrates. I think one was a magistrate. Maybe the other was a legal practitioner. So they sit next to her, but they have the same voting powers on guilty or not guilty as the judge. So the two assessors can actually outvote the judge. But where the judge has the final say is the interpretation of any legal aspects. The judge is the final say. Then you see Gerrie now on the left-hand side, who, as you know, was last week on our show. And his second, or his junior, although she wasn't very junior, she was quite a senior person, was Advocate Andrea Johnson, who now heads up the investigative directorate at the NPA. Now, she had worked with Gerrie in the Hawks for many years and was an incredibly competent prosecutor in her own right. So when I say junior, I don't mean she was a junior in the field. And so she was the second to Gerrie. On the right-hand side, you see Barry Roux standing up there, highly respected ex-prosecutor, used to lecture at the Justice College. And then Kenny Aldridge was his second junior, if you want to put it that way, advocate. And I like Gerrie said, I have a lot of respect also for Barry Roux. Very great legal mind. I think he had a very frustrating case to defend. But really decent man, respectable, polite, just very professional.
It was just so nice to hear Gerrie speak about his colleagues, and these guys go to war against one another in the courtroom, but retain such great respect for one another. It's so great. All right, and then we've got. Oh, sorry. Wait, did I go back to here?
Maybe what he was charged with before we jump into the whole.
Sure. I mean, if you want to, go for it.
Yeah, sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to find.
There you go. Exactly. Get your notes up, Gerard, before you start making suggestions.
I got a second screen here, everybody. That's why if I look up, I'm looking at my second screen. So basically, it was the murder of Reeva, which they said was they charged him with a premeditated murder, which of course is facing a life sentence. Then it was the shooting through the sunroof in the car that I mentioned right in the beginning. And then the Tasha's incident, I think earlier that year, where he'd been in Tasha's restaurant at Melrose Arch in Johannesburg on a Saturday, I think Saturday or Sunday at lunchtime, very busy restaurant. I've been there a few times myself. And he knows that one of the people he's having lunch with has a Glock 27 pistol. So in this crowded restaurant, he says, "Hey, can I see your gun?" Now, this is all against what the Firearms Control Act says how you should be handling the gun. So the guy says, "Yeah, sure," and hands the firearm underneath the table. Oscar takes it, and he says the gun went off in his hand, but he didn't pull the trigger. Short answer to that question. So he was charged with the negligent discharge of a firearm, etc. He also then tried to get the person whose firearm it was to claim that they held the gun when it went off, because he said, "Look, you know me, I'm a high-profile figure. It'll be all over the media." So he also asked his friend to lie about that fact. Now, what's interesting is that, and I might be jumping ahead a bit, is that if you know anything about Glocks, Glocks have 3 different safety mechanisms built into it that the firearm cannot discharge. It's impossible for a Glock to discharge unless you have completely pulled the trigger all the way to the back. I'm a Glock armorer. I am trained as a Glock armorer, so I don't know what I'm talking about. No Glock can go off unless it's been altered by someone else, which it shouldn't be. It cannot go off unless you pull that trigger completely. It's got 3 different safety mechanisms that actually all work from that particular trigger. So his statement that it went off without him pulling the trigger is not possible. And Chris Mangena, the forensics guy, did testify to that. So those were the 3 things that he was charged with in that one very same trial.
Okay.
All right. So the trial started on the 3rd of March 2014. So just over a year after the incident. We eventually had judgment in September and sentencing in October of that same year, just to give you the time span of. And we thought this was going to be like a 2-week trial, and it just went. I don't know how many court days. I'm sure somebody's got it somewhere. It just went on and on and on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah. All right. Shall we jump back to look at some of the guys behind the scenes, or is that getting too far ahead?
No. Let's do that.
Some more of your images here.
So what was interesting?
So tell us who's here. Yeah.
So this is one of the empty judges' rooms in the courthouse building. So we've been given this room for the team to sit in. When there's an adjournment or in the morning before we get, the day starts, we sit here and meet. I've never heard of that before. So, but we were able to get this little office for our sort of strategizing meeting. So on the couch on the left is Benny van Staden. So he's the crime scene guy who was on duty that day, whose job it was to document the scene. Very, very competent crime scene guy, very experienced at that point of view. Sitting behind him with the sort of bluish shirt and the tie, that's Francois Moller. Francois was a ex-murder and robbery detective, but then he became a cell phone expert. He sadly has left the police and works for a private security company. So he was there helping us with the cell phone analysis. Then next to him with the black shirt is then Captain Mike van Aert. Mike van Aert, an ex-Brixton murder and robbery cop, worked with Piet Belleveld for many years. And Mike was given the case after the initial investigating officer, Hilton Botha, was removed from the case. He was removed from the case, and Mike then took it over. Mike's a phenomenal guy, nicest person you'll ever meet, very humble, and just a phenomenal investigator. The right-hand side, who's the guy with the sort of light shirt, who's kind of just sort of turning away from us, that's actually Andrew Leask, who was mentioned by Gerry last week, that used to work in the police, then worked in Scorpions with Gerry, and at that point had been out of the police, if I recall correctly. So that's kind of just some of the team members. Then that's Mike again on the left-hand side. Then on the right-hand picture, sitting on that couch comfortably with his arms out, that's Gerry, obviously. Then Andrew Leask on the left-hand side. Who else we got here on the next slide? There's me and Bronwyn. So Bronwyn was obviously my colleague in the investigative psychology section. She was one of my psychologists. Amazing person, really competent at what she did. So she kind of became like, there was sometimes, like I said, when I was not able to be present. I think I had to go overseas for a conference. So Bronwyn sat in, and then often we'd be there together. Or if there was, as I said, something that required my attention, Bronwyn would then be there for continuity purposes. Bronwyn also sadly has left the police since then. And on the left-hand side with these little lanyard things we had to wear, because getting into the courthouse and into the courtroom was an absolute bloody nightmare because the media and the people coming to watch. And these were all little cards that allowed us to kind of breeze through everything and get inside without hassle. So that's obviously me sitting next to her. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be able to talk Bronwyn into coming onto the show one of these days. She'd be a lovely guest, featured in a lot of the stuff that we've filmed over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so this is just some snippets from the courtroom. Obviously, there were microphones from the TV cameras and everybody else, the news agencies. So that was quite invasive. And then we had sort of TV screens put up for the purposes of displaying pictures. Because normally what happens is you print out a physical photo album and you make like 5 copies, and then the judge gets a copy, the prosecution, the defense. So here they just kind of put up these TV screens because of the massive amount of information. It's just easier to show things digitally, which again is not common in cases. So this, as I said, became later when Meryl Foster testified about this general anxiety disorder, and then of course that became a big central issue, and that led to Oscar being sent off for observation at Westkopjes Hospital. I used to actually work many years ago before I joined the police. So we had basically the various witnesses, from neighbors to security guards, testifying what they heard, and was it gunshots and was it bats, etc. Once we finished with the prosecution's case, of course, then it was the defense's case to call their witnesses, and they called everything from sound people to forensic pathologists to anesthetists to sports doctors, etc. What's interesting is that a lot of the state's expert witnesses were kind of very well praised for the very good evidence they gave. But a lot of Oscar expert witnesses, like their ballistics guy, at one point had to admit that the firearm they were using was jammed during their tests. So what we were listening to when they were doing the reconstruction in the courtroom wasn't consecutive shots. It was the same gunshot, but they just played it 4 times. And, just a lot of things that the experts didn't really perform spectacularly when it came to the defense's case. And then, of course, the main star witness was Oscar when he testified.
Yeah. I want to just kind of address what the prosecution's kind of main theory was. We've got a comment here because, again, there is still a fair amount of cynicism and skepticism about the trial and about the outcome of the trial, etc. So we've got a comment here from Mbubu. I lost respect for the justice system when I saw Gerry chasing a theory and not the evidence. What would your response be to that? Just because it seems like a good catalyst for a comment.
Look, there always has to be the evidence, because you can have a theory, but if the evidence doesn't support it, the courts work on evidence. So you don't have to prove motive in a South African trial. So I think, what Gerry did is he was trying to say you knew you were shooting at Reeva. So his view was that this was an intimate partner murder.
And that they were fighting. They were having an argument, and it led to an outburst, whatever happened, and there was an outburst, and Oscar acted reactionary to an argument or something.
Yeah, but that's context. Make a long story short, what the court ultimately found is that at that point in time, when that trigger was pulled, you didn't have a legal justification to shoot anybody, even if it was an armed burglar behind the toilet door, because your life wasn't in immediate danger. And that's ultimately what the case boiled down to, is that you say you thought it was a burglar, but even if it was a burglar, they were behind a door. You can't, and people think, but you should be able to shoot someone if they're in your house. Well, unfortunately, the law doesn't see it that way. You can only use lethal force when there is no other option left to you. Like, in other words, if I don't shoot this person, I'm going to be seriously injured or die. Or somebody else is going to be seriously injured or die. That's the only time, in a nutshell, you can actually shoot someone. If you have any other options, like fleeing the scene, walking away, etc., using less lethal options, by law, you have to use them. So Gerry did very much push that it was an intimate partner murder. They were having a fight, an argument, the screams, the bats, the gunshots, etc. The text messages that were introduced to show that there were problems in the relationship.
Yeah,
those don't prove murder, and it's not required to prove murder, but it kind of gives context. But like I said, ultimately, what it boiled down to is, did he have a legal grounds to shoot? And the answer ultimately was no, he didn't. And that's what he was found eventually guilty on.
Okay.
But also, the problem is we have the judge who didn't comment on what she felt in the end this was. The judge never said this was an intimate partner murder. This was a mistaken identity. We don't know what the judge felt. And that's why everybody has their opinions. People say, he knew it, must have known it was her. People said it didn't. Well, unfortunately, that's just going to be everybody's opinions. We're not going to get an answer to that question unless Oscar says it was mistaken identity. He thought it was a burglar. And I don't think he's ever going to change that.
Yeah, it would have helped if the judge had kind of put a stake in the ground. Yeah.
Still, you still would have had people who disagree with it, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then what? Anything else that's kind of interesting to talk about, or that we should just talk about from the actual process of the trial itself? The fact, again, the way she was hit with the bullets, the fact that people argued that she would likely have screamed initially. It's not like, chances are that when she was shot, she didn't go down straight away, that there would have been a response there potentially, or likely.
Yeah, look, I mean, but those shots would have been fired within the space of a second. It's not like shot, wait and listen, shoot again.
Sure.
I mean, they were basically one after another, and he wouldn't be hearing anything, even if she was screaming. So, I mean, that's, I don't think you could say really much from that. I'm just going to check here.
Okay.
So basically, yeah, so the defense, they obviously said the police messed up the scene. They said it was, mistaken identity. I mean, he testified extensively about this. I heard the noise, thought there was something. I went inside and thought someone was coming out. Where it gets a little bit, is that he kind of changed his version a few times. And the one, it was like, I thought they were coming out, so I shot them. Then it was, actually, no, the gun went off by accident. No, it was, got a startle and the gun went off. So the problem is those are quite different defenses. If you said, I acted in what they call putative self-defense, in other words, I was under the impression that my life was in danger, any other person would have thought the same under those circumstances, and I shoot, and it turns out my life wasn't not in danger, that you might be able to use putative self-defense. A putative part means actually your life actually wasn't in danger, but you had a justifiable reason to think it was. But the problem is, if you said you were shooting to sort of stop the threat that's attacking you, was it justified at that point in time? And the answer was no, because you could have backed down the passage, keeping your gun trained on that person, leave, push the alarm, move away, keeping your gun sort of pointed in the direction of potential harm. So I think they realized that might be a problem. So it started to be, I didn't aim at the door, I was shooting at the door, the gun went off by accident, I didn't mean, I acted involuntary. And those kind of really did not help him, unfortunately.
Okay. Just asking a question here. So the trial ran from March 3rd to September 12th. 41 days over several months then. What was the outcome, the verdict? Just talk
So
about
long
the
story
verdict
short,
and then what happened
judge,
from there.
We thought this judgment was going to take forever. And it was, I think it was done in like an hour or two. And she kind of just didn't comment on a lot of the evidence and a lot of the experts and give her interpretation of what she understood happened. And basically, she kind of misinterpreted the concept of dolus eventualis. And to make a long story short, convicted him. So in South Africa, if you charge someone with, say, premeditated murder, they have a concept called a competent verdict. So let's say that the evidence doesn't show premeditation, but it's still a murder. Then you can convict on the lesser charge of murder. So you can always convict someone of something that's lesser in that same line of thingy. So from a premeditated murder, you can convict of a non-premeditated murder. Or if you felt there was no intent, but it was rather negligence, you could convict of a culpable homicide or manslaughter in other terminology, which is the negligent causing of someone's death. So long story short, the court misinterpreted dolus eventualis and said, I'm going to find you guilty of culpable homicide, which is the negligent killing of another person. In other words, you were careless and someone died. You didn't have the intent to murder someone.
And this would be the equivalent of something like manslaughter elsewhere. For those who watch true crime content.
Like you're driving your car drunk and you ride over someone.
Yeah.
You're not going to charge as murder. You'll be charged with manslaughter, culpable homicide. Well, we might feel differently, but that's unfortunately what the law says.
Yeah.
And he was sentenced on that charge and basically got, I think it's a certain section of the Criminal Procedure Act where you get 5 years, but if you behave well, you can be released after 1 year by the head of the prison, not even a parole board. Of course, Harry was unhappy with this and felt that, in fact, even immediately, everybody's saying, but her interpretation of dolus eventualis was incorrect. Dolus eventualis, the simplest way I like to understand it is, to explain it, is when you foresee the possibility of something happening as an option, and you go ahead with your behavior, and that option happens, that's a form of intent. So in other words, if I say, if I do this behavior, the outcome is going to be either A or B, and B happens, and B is, for example, a crime, you can be convicted. So it would be the same as if, an example I like to give is imagine that you're a construction guy, you're working on a tall building, and you kind of finished and you've cleaned up a lot of the rubble at on the 10th story of the building, and most of the rubble has been taken downstairs, and then you realize as you're doing your final check, oh my God, there's a big brick here, and I don't feel like carrying this brick down. So I'm going to throw this brick over the side of the building and it'll land in the rubbish skip. Now, I know that there are people walking around there, but you know what? I think everybody's gone home. I'm probably not going to hit anybody. So I've foreseen the possibility, and I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take my chances, and I throw that brick, and it, boom, hits somebody on the head and kills them. Because I foresaw the possibility, and I went ahead anyway, if that possibility happens, that's a form of intent, which then makes it also, you can use that as to find someone guilty of murder. So Gerard appealed that, saying, you got dolus eventualis wrong, you misinterpreted the law, hence we are appealing. And it went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and they agreed. And they said, yeah, we agree with you that the court misinterpreted dolus eventualis, and the court can not just give a retrial, but they can impose what should have been done, because they've read all the record, all the arguments, and the court felt that you're correct in your appeal application, that it is not culpable homicide, there was a misinterpretation of the law, and we are substituting your culpable homicide conviction with a murder conviction. But now you haven't been sentenced. The evidence heard at sentencing previously was not on a murder charge. So the court then kicked it back to the original Judge Masipa to do the sentencing based on it now being a murder charge. So he wasn't found not guilty, and this was another trial. It was an appeal on his culpable homicide conviction, and it was overturned and made a murder conviction. Now we have to go back and have a resentencing proceedings on a murder conviction sentence, and the judge upped the sentence by 1 year. Now, the minimum sentence for murder, non-premeditated murder, because that's what it was found, that it was not premeditated, is 15 years. So when you go up from 5 years to 1 year, it's kind of like the judge giving the Supreme Court of Appeal the middle finger.
Okay.
So Gerard, quite rightly so, said, nope, we're going to appeal that because the sentence is not appropriate for a murder charge. And it was 100% right to do that. And the Supreme Court of Appeal agreed that it was not right. And they essentially, I think they imposed 15 years, but because he already served that 1 year in prison and he'd been out waiting the appeal, so they took whatever time since his conviction, previously the first time round, was taken off the ultimate sentence. So I think he only had to serve, there was 13 years left, and I think he then would have to serve half of it before he could be eligible for parole.
And he was actually released on house arrest for a period here in October.
Yeah, so that would have been because the initial sentence, remember the appeals take a while to happen.
Yeah.
So he was already out based on that initial 5 year, of which he had to serve 1 if he ate himself. So he was already out. So it was, I think horrific. You're out, and then the appeal, the sentence is made longer, and you go back in. I mean, that must have just been such a horrible moment. I do actually have empathy for him in that sense of having to go back into prison.
No, I mean, I find, within a year, within less than a year of the initial trial, he was watching TV on the weekends. So, anyway, okay, so sentenced to 13 years. Yeah.
The final sentence was on November 2017. So remember, the trial started in March 2014. First appeal process on the conviction. What is he convicted of? Overturned into murder, and then we had the sentencing appeal. So everything was finalized by the Supreme Court of Appeal, and this is a panel of judges. It's not one judge who does the appeal. So the panel of incredibly smart judges, and then imposed the final sentence in November of 2017. So a long road for everybody, Oscar as well. Yeah. But I think one that was properly fought, and the society got to see how appeals work, even from a conviction and also sentencing point of view.
And then we skip ahead to 2023. And on March 31st, Oscar is denied parole, as he had not yet served the required 50% of his sentence. So his parole hearings start already in 2023, which is about right because it's halfway, just about halfway through his sentence. So it was just a little bit premature here. Yeah. And then
that was weird that correctional services with such a high-profile case miscalculated the amount of time before he was actually due for parole. That was just embarrassing by correctional services.
And then we jump to 2024, and Oscar is granted parole on January 5th. And on that same day, he is released from prison under parole conditions, including media restrictions, and a required rehabilitation program.
I mean,
So
and I
that's
don't
where
have a
we
problem.
stand
People say, "Oh, should he have been released? Should he not have been released?" And my view is, if he'd followed whatever any other person had done in terms of when he was in prison, he behaved himself, he did whatever programs, and if any other person convicted of the same crime would have been released on parole, then he should be released on parole. He shouldn't be kept longer because he's a high-profile person. He shouldn't be kept longer because we don't like him, or there shouldn't be favoritism. So I personally don't have an issue that he was given parole then. Do I think he's a risk for reoffending? I don't think so. I think there's a very low chance of him doing something like this again. I think any of the concerns from the past probably mitigated now after all this time. He's not going to be able to own a firearm, obviously. So I don't really have an issue with the fact that he was granted parole, to be honest with you.
Well, he's apparently got a new girlfriend, so hopefully she's confident that that's the case as well. Okay, should we go to a couple of the questions here, Gerard? This has come up a bit from Mel. As an athlete, Oscar was conditioned to be reactive. Do you think the conditioning played any part in his behavior? And this is something that's come up. He was something you've spoken about before, that we've chatted about before, is, he was an international sports legend. And that's got to have an impact on somebody's psyche.
I mean, I think to be an Olympic athlete, you have to have a certain type of personality. Now, would that be positive or negative for him during a shooting situation, which is something completely different? I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know if it was to his benefit or not. One could argue maybe he's better at dealing with stress and anxiety because he's an athlete who has to deal with pressure. But this is a shooting. This is a situation when you fear for your life. It's very different to running on the track.
Ideology, the danger behind the door was the only credible defense for Oscar, but surely nobody ever believed that.
Yeah. And I think that, like I said, that became the crux of the argument, definitely at the appeal, is that whether we thought it was, the boiled down to the essence of, like I said, he had no reason legally to shoot someone at that point in time. That was not his only option. The person was behind, obviously, what was a locked door, not even an unlocked door. You didn't know if they had a firearm, even if it was a burglar. But even if it was a burglar, were you about to die? The answer to that simply is no. And you could back down the passage, get Reeva out, press the alarm, cover yourself. You have a firearm, which is a great leveler. That's why people have firearms, that you just pull the trigger and you can kill someone. So the argument really did be condensed down, I think, at the appeal to he had no grounds to be shooting someone at that point in time, even if it was a burglar. That's the simplest argument. So yes, I mean, there were some of the questions here is, should he have should Gerard have left the whole issue of that it was an intimate partner, he was shooting at her, there was a fight? I don't know. Whether that was a right or wrong, I don't know. Gerard's a greater legal mind than I am, that's for sure. But the crux of it boiled down in the end is you didn't have grounds to shoot somebody. Yeah. And that's what the court found.
Vubu, we mentioned his comment earlier. There was zero evidence of an argument. Harry could have just gone with the can't shoot anyone theory, not the unsubstantiated route he went with. I mean, that's kind of what it ended up being, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but they didn't. For a corporate, they did call witnesses who spoke of that they'd heard shouting and an argument.
Sure. Okay.
If I recall correctly, I'm just trying to scan through my notes here, which I probably won't be able to find the right thing. That neighbors were called, that they heard screams and shouting. So there was, for a call correct, there's some evidence of an argument, but then there was debating, but, was this before or after the shooting? Was the screams and then the gunshots, or was it gunshots and then screams? And of course, the judge didn't comment on those aspects, so we don't know what her finding was about that. So, yeah.
I've brought this comment up a couple of times from Dr. Simone. There was a pattern of reckless behavior before he shot Reeva, i.e. the sunroof and Tasha's incident. That is significant.
Yeah, I agree. But again,
even after the appeal, the sentence was incredibly light. Sorry, Gerard.
Yeah. So the issue, if we jump back to the previous question, sorry, my brain's already lost.
There was a pattern of reckless behavior before he shot Reeva, i.e. the sunroof and Tasha's incident. That's significant.
Absolutely. I mean, those behaviors with a firearm. I mean, I'm a firearms collector. I'm a firearms sports shooter. So I'm, very interested in firearms and firearms law. I mean, those are absolutely inappropriate behavior. You know, you don't fire a bullet up in the air through a sunroof. Firstly, because it comes down. Secondly, it's illegal to do that. It's going to come down and potentially kill someone. And asking for a firearm in a restaurant. I mean, that's just absolutely reckless behavior for a firearms owner. So yes, I think that's a valid argument. He was perhaps not the kind of guy who should have had a firearm, but sadly there's a lot of people who do meet the requirements but don't behave the way that they should. So I do think, recklessness with a firearm. I think that's part of why they introduced those cases as part of the trials, to show a history of not actually being behaving properly with your firearm. And they actually introduced the question from the firearms test, which is about shooting people in your house. You know, when can you shoot someone in your house? I mean, that was a question he had to answer during his I think it's the competency, firearms competency exam.
Okay, we'll go for another 10 minutes, Gerard, until past. Get your questions in if you have them on the case. Gerard, if the trial was before 1995, would Oscar have been charged with capital murder?
If you mean capital in a sense with a death sentence,
I think so.
Look, I think pre-95, had he been convicted of murder, I think back in those days, again, it was the issue, if it's premeditated, you would probably get the death sentence. If it's not premeditated, you would not get the death sentence. So I think even back in pre-95, if they found him guilty of a non-premed, he wouldn't have got the death sentence. Very unlikely.
Okay. From Marius again, Gerard, you are 100% correct. Oscar's actions weren't justified. Oscar's life was not in danger when he was in the bathroom. From Lillian, hopefully the time behind bars has humbled him, as he was just too arrogant. Prestige, fame, and fortune went to his head. Probably some good truth in there, Lillian. And from James here, but as a person with a physical disability, could it not be argued that should the intruder pass the door, he knew he could lose that confrontation and he took irrational but plausible set steps to win?
Look, I think it's a yes and a no. He was mobile on his stumps. I mean, there's evidence in courtroom he showed that he was mobile. But that's why you have a firearm. A firearm equalizes things. So whether you are in a wheelchair, you have a firearm, you can end that person's life just as easily as an able-bodied person with a firearm. So I do think the firearm levels things. Might it feed into his fears and anxieties? And might that be something that's mitigating? You know, I don't feel as safe as somebody else because I'm not as mobile. That would probably be more something that could be taken into account at a sentencing.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. I actually wanted to ask Kerry this last week, and we just didn't get to it. But Charlotte Camphor said they should bring back the death sentence. I'm just curious to know what your position is on capital punishment, Gerard.
Look, I think at this point in time, the Constitution says it's not going to happen. So unless you've changed the Constitution, it's not going to happen. I think the question for me would be, why do we want to bring it back? Do we think bringing it back is going to lower the murder rate? It probably won't. Do we want to bring it back because we just feel if you've taken someone else's life, you shouldn't be part of society anymore? We shouldn't be funding you to sit in prison? Well, yes, then that would achieve that goal. But kind of the research often shows it doesn't actually lower your murder rate. So if it's about lowering the crime rate, that's not really necessarily going to be very effective or deterring people. If it's about, well, why do we just don't want these people as part of society anymore if you've taken a life? Well, then, yeah, that would definitely achieve that goal if that was your main goal. So I think it's kind of like, what do we want for it? But the problem is, you can have the most horrific punishment. The research shows us that if people don't fear getting caught, it doesn't matter. If I don't think the cops are ever going to catch me, or if I don't think that the justice system is competent to get me prosecuted, then it doesn't matter what the sentence is. So you actually have a highly functional policing and prosecution for any possible punishment to actually have the desired deterrent effect. And I don't know if we really have a system that's functioning so great to make me fear I'm going to get caught.
I think there are many, 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 many things that can happen to deter criminality and to address the problem of crime. before we got to the need for a discussion about the death penalty. I mean, everything we discuss on the show this week, the fact that you've got somebody of Gerinel's stature saying things like the criminal justice system has completely collapsed in this country. I did think during the week after the conversation with Kerry last week, it's pretty amazing that we live in a country where we have a discussion with somebody who is, has been at the center of a lot of these mechanics, like Advocate Nell, for a long time. And when you speak to him, you see he's a pretty level-headed, pretty, open-minded kind of guy. And then there's not more of a furrow. I feel like we should wake up the next morning and everyone's up in arms that, we live in this time where, it's so difficult to have any faith in the criminal justice system. Do you know what the current solve rate is roughly for murders in South Africa, Gerard?
Why do I think it's about 12%?
I've heard like 10 to 12% around there. I mean, which that in itself goes to show how little deterrent there is from I'm likely going to get caught point of view if, 88% of murders potentially are not getting solved. It's probably easier to get caught. There's more people getting caught for not doing their taxes. Probably. Yeah. There's probably much more efficiency there. Yeah,
true. I know last week someone posted a question about the Oscar case, and I remember it's clearly, they spoke about, this is unfair. It was double jeopardy. Double jeopardy means that if you're found not guilty, you can't just be somewhat prosecuted again. Let's have another trial and see if we can get you guilty. That's the issue of double jeopardy. Once you're found not guilty, if you're appealing that trial, you're appealing the not guilty verdict because there's an error in the law, and you go to the appeals court, and the appeal court agrees with the appeals court and substitute you're not guilty with a guilty finding. But that's not a double jeopardy issue. It's not a second trial just because we failed in the first one. So that's why there's a big difference between an appeal process and the concept of double jeopardy.
An important note on sentencing is that it should act as a deterrent, B, be punitive, C, provide a sense of justice to victims. Yes, to everyone that watches. Yep. I mean, I know people like my old man. I was like, "Have you seen what we're doing?" He's like, "Well, I didn't see it today." And I'm like, "It's on YouTube. You can, if you don't watch it live, you can just watch. It sits there. You can watch it anytime." So yes, we do the live at 8:00 on a Tuesday, and then the show is available for you to share and watch and critique whatever you want to do for time indefinite after that. Yes,
I just want to comment on what ideology or ideology?
Yes.
Depending if it's English or Afrikaans.
Yeah, exactly.
Note anything that it's deterrent, punitive, and a sense of justice. Absolutely right. A sentence is also about, retribution, rehabilitation, the offender society, etc. And this is why I get very upset when it comes to parole boards, because the parole boards seem to forget the punishment side of it. They seem to forget the deterrence side of it. And a sense of justice for the victims. And they solely seem to focus on, has this guy behaved well since he's been in prison? Has he done whatever rehabilitation courses we would expect of him? If he has, he should get parole. Which for me, when a judge, as Gerry said last week, when a judge gives you your, X amount of years, that's based on all these factors here: deterrence, punitive, rehabilitation, the offender society, justice for the victim. And the judge then gives a sentence of X amount of years. If the parole board is only taking into account one aspect, which is the offender and his rehabilitation, I do feel that they're kind of undermining the courts, and that those same concepts that the court took into account when they gave the sentence should be the same concepts that the parole board is determining when it looks at parole, and not just focusing on rehabilitation of the offender to give the person release halfway through a sentence or at whatever point if it's a life sentence. So very important aspect that ideology is mentioning.
From Shirley, poverty is the cause of crime and our dysfunctional justice system does not help. And then Indigo adds, poverty is definitely not the only cause of crime, greed, etc. Yes, we agree.
And of course, different kinds of crime too. Remember, poverty is not the cause of intimate partner murder, but it's caused the other.
There's a comment
from a lot of other things.
Shaka, no person put to death ever came back to be a repeat offender. I mean, there's some truth in that, Shaka.
But as someone commented just now, do we trust our current system that it's competent enough? Because you can't undo a guilty sentence, a death sentence. Do we have enough faith in our criminal justice system that when we give that death sentence, we're 100% sure? Look, when death sentence was around, I think there was always like an automatic appeal. So it wasn't as if judge sentences you today and tomorrow you're hanging. There are typically one or two appeal processes that automatically kick in whether or not you apply for it.
We did that case a few weeks back.
I don't know. Yeah.
We did that case a few weeks back where we had some of the paperwork and it showed some of that process from back in the day, from that 50s case. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I mean, hopefully we've had a nice discussion about the Oscar case, and it's answered, a nice refresher to remind us of what we all went through in 2013 and post that. And of course, as we all know, Oscar is currently out on parole, and time will tell if Gerard is right and if he is not a risk for repeat offending. I agree with you. I mean, such a high-profile guy. It seems like it would be, likely. You hope that he's got all of that and under check. Thanks for sharing. I want to also know, I just want to answer this. I want to also know, what is the difference between being a member on YouTube versus Patreon? There's not really a difference. It's just another option. You can become a member on YouTube, but we've got the Patreon as well because obviously, we're trying to grow the channel and trying to make this into something that, we can do full time, maybe even down the road somewhere. And to do that, we invite you to support the channel and to contribute to independent creators like ourselves. And I think you should be doing the same for others that you love and enjoy and follow and subscribe to. And so it's really just two options. And we do put some of the same content that we put on the YouTube page in the members section across to Patreon as well, which I must do tomorrow. I must update some of that content there tomorrow. So no, it's just an opportunity to contribute, as we kind of move, because the SABC haven't been commissioning for a while. Here we are trying to bring you alternative content from what you're used to traditionally here in South Africa. And so, all the help we can get in doing that, because it's not like it's not like it's easy to go to Nike and say, hey, how do you like to sponsor a true crime channel or something like that? It's not the most, not the most brand friendly type of content. So we want your help, guys. Do this together. You know what I mean? Team effort.
Are we going to say anything about next week's episode, or was that something?
Sure. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Let's talk about next week's episode.
Okay. So in
if
brief,
you're happy to.
Yeah. So we like to bring you interesting people who can play some role in the world of crime. So we are having Jana Marx, who is a long-standing crime reporter for, I think, 3 or 4 publications. So it's about her career as a crime reporter, interesting things that have happened to her in the process of being a crime reporter. She, of course, wrote a book about the so-called Krugersdorp cult killers that killed a couple of people a couple of years ago. It was a very high-profile case, which I think was also made into a documentary series. Is it on Showmax? Devil's Dorp, if I recall correctly. So Jana Marx will be our guest next week. As I said, her history as a crime reporter, and of course delving into some interesting moments that she's had. So stay tuned for that. I see people from Oklahoma, Florida.
That's going to be awesome. And
Helen was back.
Yes, I was actually going to end. I was going to say we must end the show as we normally start, with a hello from Helen, because she just jumped on the chat there right at the end. Which experts are going to be called?
My water bottle.
To have their testimony. You cannot now. Okay. All right. Hello from Florida, James. Okay. So there we go. Well, that's tonight's episode, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do. The other thing I wanted to say before we go is, if you have suggestions for episodes as well, please do feel free to let us know. You can email us at profilerafricainfo@gmail.com. All one word, profilerafricainfo@gmail.com. I would bring it up on screen. I've got it somewhere. I just don't know where. Can't see where it is on my very busy screen here. But thank you, guys. Gerard, we look forward to next week's episode. As always, we do try to bring you a wonderful array of guests. Do go back and check the Gerinel episode from last week if you haven't. It was a really great conversation, and we really appreciate all your great feedback on that one. Booty Boo,
like 18,000 views.
We're definitely gonna do Stuart Vulcan. That's one of my favorites. You know, I was a student down in Grahamstown in the 90s when that case was going on, and it really was kind of the case that got me most interested in this subject matter here in South Africa. And of course, Gerard has plenty to say on that case as well. And we can certainly talk you through what he did and bring you some of the great crime scene. Great. I mean, you know, bring you some of the evidence and crime scene material and pointing outs and all that kind of stuff. So we'll definitely do the Boetie Boer case in the near future, but get all your suggestions in. All right, enough talking. I think it's just time to say goodbye, Gerard. Thanks to Bax, Amy, Fred, everyone for your support as always. Please do hit the like and subscribe button. It really is important to subscribe. We're just about we're around 8,500 subscribers. We want to get to 10,000 subscribers. That's our current goal. 10,000, then it'll be 100,000. And then global domination. We don't have to go pitching TV shows to fading broadcasters around the world. Thank you very much, everybody. Profiler Africa will be back live next week at 8. Don't forget, you can obviously watch this episode at your leisure and share it with your friends. Any final words, Gerard?
No, I'm good. Thank you, everybody, as always. And
thank you, everybody.
Great to be back here.
Exactly. We love you guys. Sleep tight. Have a good evening, everybody. And don't forget to keep looking over your shoulder, okay?
I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Reeva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.